Good evening and welcome to the Dr. Norman L. Ford Science Literacy Lecture Series. I'm Richard Ice. I'm the interim provost of the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. Let me give you a little background on the creation of this lecture series. A couple years ago, a St. John's alumnus from the 1970s, who wishes to remain anonymous, came to us with the desire to endow a lecture series. He majored in the natural sciences as an undergraduate. His goal for the lecture series is to engage our students, our members of our academic community, and the wider public in cutting-edge science topics, igniting their curiosity and developing their overall science literacy. We are deeply grateful to him for this generous gift and creative concept. He was unable to join us this evening, but has conveyed to us that he is thrilled with the selection of Dr. Michael Osterholm as the lecture series' inaugural speaker, having admired Dr. Osterholm many years. At the donor's request, the lecture series is named in honor of one of his favorite and most inspiring professors, Professor Emeritus Dr. Norman L. Ford. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Ford in the audience tonight for this inaugural lecture series, along with his family and friends. Would you wave your hand here, Norm? Dr. Ford taught biology at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University for 31 years. From 1967 until his retirement in 1998. He was a specialist in ornithology and was widely published in his field. As important as his considerable professional accomplishments are, it was Dr. Ford, the consummate teacher, who is warmly remembered and admired by the hundreds of students he taught during his years here. This skill was formally recognized in 1998 when St. John's presented Dr. Ford with the Robert L. Spaeth Teacher of Distinction Award. The citation that accompanied that presentation really says it best. It said, "It's 7:45 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and Norm Ford and his class have already been at work." Did you hear that, students? They had already been at work, and it's 7:45. He came early to gather with his students in a field and listen to the morning silence, the silence and the bird songs that punctuated it. He came early to help students tune their ears, train their eyes to notice things, the color of a feather, the tone of a mating call, which the rest of us might pass by, leaving them unnoticed and unknown. For more than 30 years, Norm called his students to a more perceptive understanding of their world because of his fine-crafted presentations and emphasis on critical thought. Many students consider Dr. Norm Ford to be the finest professor of their undergraduate careers. On a personal note, 26 years ago, Dr. Ford welcomed me as a young first-year professor on this campus, and I classify him as one of my mentors, and I thank you, Norm, for that. In many ways, this lecture series in Dr. Ford's honor is a continuation of Norm's mission as our speakers call us to a more perceptive understanding of our world. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Barbara May, Associate Professor of Biology, to introduce our guest speaker tonight.
Thank you. It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Osterholm as our inaugural speaker for the Norm Ford Science Literacy Lecture. A graduate of Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, Dr. Osterholm continued his graduate work at the University of Minnesota with a master's in science, a PhD, and a master's in public health. His list of accomplishments are vast, and I'm sure I could spend a long time talking about all these, and I'm just going to mention a few. He's authored over 300 papers, 21 book chapters, and has written a book entitled Living Terrors, What America Needs to Know to Survive the Coming Bioterrorist Catastrophe. I read it a while ago and have thought about Osterholm, and he has been a hero of mine as a microbiologist for a long time. In all of his work, Dr. Osterholm is known as an advocate for the development of national emergency preparedness for rising pandemics and biological weapon attacks. His list of service is long. He served for 24 years in various roles at the Minnesota Department of Health, the last 15 as the state epidemiologist and chief of the acute disease epidemiology section. While at the Department of Health in Minnesota, Osterholm and his team were leaders in the area of infectious disease epidemiology. He led numerous investigations of outbreaks of international importance, including foodborne diseases, the association of tampons and toxic shock syndrome, the transmission of hepatitis B in healthcare settings, and the human immunodeficiency virus infection in healthcare workers. His role changed slightly in the early 2000s when he became the director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota. From 2001 to 2005, he also served as a special advisor to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under Secretary Tommy G. Thompson. He advised the national government on issues related to bioterrorism and public health preparedness. He has had additional leadership and advisory roles with other agencies, including the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the National Science Advisory Board on Biosecurity, and the World Economic Forum Working Group on Pandemics. Currently, he's a Regents Professor at the University of Minnesota. He's also the McKnight Presidential Endowed Chair in Public Health, and he remains the Director of the Center of Infectious Disease Research and Policy. He's also a distinguished teaching professor in the Division of Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of the School of Public Health, a professor in the Technological Leadership Institute in the College of Science and Engineering, and an adjunct professor in the medical school. He has reached a vast audience. Finally, he does have ties to the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, as his daughter, Dr. Erin Osterholm, who is fortunate to be with us today, is a Benny graduate. So I would like us all to give Dr. Osterholm a warm CSB SJU welcome as he presents his talk entitled Infectious Diseases of the 21st Century, A New World Order. Thanks.
Thank you, and good evening, President Himmelthus, other distinguished guests in the room, professors, students, and most of all, Norm and Billy and your family. I've had the good fortune to give lectures in many locations under many circumstances, and I can't think of any that honor me more than to be here tonight with you, Norm, and to celebrate this inaugural address. Norm and I go back a long, long time. I never will forget the first time you called me and asked me to come lecture here in my busy schedule, and I realized why you are who you are, because no one could say no. But more importantly, as was described earlier, Norm is the consummate professor. You invented the term pay it forward long before anybody else ever thought it up. Your legacy is in this room tonight, and it'll be here forever, long after you and I are gone. In addition to the fact that he's not just a great professor, Norm defines, for me, in a new way, the word class. I once was told that class can be defined by someone who, because of their accomplishments, could go to the head of the line, but they never fail to always go to the end of the line. Norm, you are class. And for me to be here tonight is just such an honor. Thank you. It means more to me than I can ever say. On top of that, As someone once famous said, least you do for my brother, you do for me. Erin, my daughter, not only was a Benny, but she actually was Norm's graduate assistant, TA, in his last year of teaching. Norm wrote a letter of support for her application to medical school that today, as a father, still makes me cry. Norm, thank you. It is an honor to be here with you tonight. With that, let me begin, and I will have a slide here shortly, to share with you at the outset the reason why you're here. And I don't mean for this talk, why you're here at this campus, or should be at this campus. It's because it's all about a liberal arts education. Tonight I'm going to talk about why connecting the dots in a modern world becomes more and more important every day. I've been in this business for 40 years, and I can say with all honesty, more has happened in the last 5 to 7 years than happened in the previous 33 to 35 years. The calculus of change in this world is working against us to be successful against many, many issues, not just world politics or world economics, but also public health and infectious diseases. And tonight, that's my job, is to share with you that and why I am looking to you, many of the students in this room, for the solutions. Somebody in this room tonight could very well be the person that provides the answers that some of us old-timers haven't quite figured out how to do yet. Last count, I had about 55,000 slides in my repertoire of slides, electronic slides. And I have to tell you, if I had a slide fired tonight, the one slide I'd save is this one. This one tells me and tells you about the world that we live in today probably better than the other slide. While it's a bit old, because it was published in a little over past 2000, if you look, you can see, first, the last 150 years, it literally took us over a year to circumnavigate the globe around the world with fast sailing vessels, and by the 1950s, with the advent of jet engines, we could do that in a little over a day. Well, I can tell you that that flat part of the line is actually maybe the most dynamic part of the line tonight, and I'll show you why and what that's about. I think about that. Last Tuesday afternoon, I was in a meeting in Seoul, Korea at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was actually on a conference call back here in Minneapolis at 5 o'clock that afternoon. Think about how fast we now travel and traverse the world. If you look at world population, think about this from 1850 when we were talking about 600,000 people in the world, and now we're talking, or 600 million, excuse me, now we're talking about 7.6 billion. And as some of you may know, the UN just revised its estimates of the world population increase to now 10.2 billion people by 2050. We don't even need to wait that long. 1 out of every 8 people who's ever lived is on the face of the earth right now. And guess where they're being born? They're being born largely in the megacities of the developing world, where if Charles Dickens were alive today, couldn't adequately describe the lack of sanitation and the living conditions that these people have to experience. If you wanted to make infectious disease cauldrons, you would invent the developing worlds of the modern world, and you'd create the cities that are in those developing countries. That's a big change. Now, if you look at world population in terms of life expectancy, we have really had remarkable changes. Make no mistake about that. In 1900 in Minnesota, the average life expectancy was 48 years. It took us over 80,000 generations to get to that point. And since that time, literally, in places like the United States, for every 3 days we've lived in the last 110 years, we've gained 1 day of life expectancy. That's amazing. Now, the rest of the world hasn't come along. Now, why is that? It has very little to do with modern medicine. Modern medicine's done very little for that. It's about a guy named Tesla, who all of you now think of the electric car. Mr. Tesla actually gave us the alternating current. He invented, in a sense, modern electricity. With modern electricity, we could make water pumps and create safe water supplies. With water supplies and pumped water, we could create sewer systems. With electricity, we could refrigerate food. With electricity, we could make vaccines. That's where all that change has come from. And unfortunately, some of us are very concerned. We're about ready to tip that those numbers are not going to continue to increase, and you'll see why in a minute. So don't think that what we've experienced over the last 110 years necessarily dictates where we're going, and I'll explain why tonight, and I'll let you be the judge. If you look at world population, this is from a slide from our World Economic Forum in Davos in February, where in fact if you look at world population increase, the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which is the United States, the EU, Australia, etc., the quote-unquote developed countries, you can see world population increase is really quite minimal. But if you look at the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, as well as all the others, look where the growth is at. That's where the infrastructure is the least. That's where we have major challenges. And I'll share that with you tonight, why the diseases that occur there are going to be very important to you here. Because you don't have to be there to get those diseases anymore. And from an infectious disease standpoint, if you get nothing else out of this lecture, just know oceans, mountain ranges, canyons, and political boundaries are irrelevant to microbes today. And that's a very important point. This is the world we live in today, where the peri-urban kind of slum is right there with the modern world. Just in recent weeks, I've been involved with several cases of high-level IT experts from India on consultation basis here in the United States who only found out after 4 to 6 weeks of coughing at their workplace that they had multi-drug resistant TB and everyone had just been exposed to it. It's not just the slums themselves, it's the spillover that's occurring in the world. In 1968, when the world decided that they would eradicate smallpox from the world, a horrible disease, they were able to do it for two reasons. One is the disease lent itself to that. It was only infection in humans. We had a vaccine that would work. But the second and most incredibly important thing is the USSR and the United States of America decided we will do it. And when those two countries decided anything in the 60s or the 70s, it happened because every domino behind it was a country. And as soon as one of the two superpowers pushed a button, everybody fell in line. Today, nobody's in charge. We don't have a world leader. We don't have one. So we can't do the same things we once did. How do you explain to people in Pakistan trying to eliminate polio that it's good to go to work every day when 87 people have been assassinated in the last 2 years just trying to deliver polio vaccine to the population? That would never have happened 30 years ago or 20 years ago, or for that matter, even 10 years ago. It is a new world order. Today we have failed states, something we wouldn't have ever thought of before. 34 countries in this world today are considered in failed state status. With the Ebola crisis we had in West Africa, I ended up doing a number of briefings on the Hill in Washington for Congress. Guess who wanted to hear about this? Not the public health committees or the health committees. It was the intelligence committees and the military committees. Because they worried that should Ebola move eastward across the central part of Africa, it would end up in the countries where Boko Haram and ISIS is alive and well. Who would be in charge then? Who would deal with that issue? How would that further basically undermine the status of the governments there? So today, trying to deliver these services are very difficult. How many of you are aware of the fact that as bad as the crisis is in Syria right now, we have good data to show that many more people have died from infectious diseases than have died from the war itself? Think about that. Lack of basic public health vaccines, safe water and food, injury-related infections. You never hear about that part, but that's part of the real world. The World Economic Forum, which is the international forum for economic issues, and as mentioned in the introduction, I chair the Pandemic Preparedness Committee for that group, but this report came out from another section of the World Economic Forum this past year. And it's a pretty important report. It interviewed and followed up from the best minds in the planning and preparedness world. And I don't have a pointer here, but if you look at the legend, you can see on the bottom the likelihood goes from lowest left to right. The impact goes from lowest bottom to top. The two red dots on the top are spread of infectious diseases and water crises. That's their words, not us public health people. That is the world's experts in preparedness. Said that's what we have to be concerned about, not all the other issues that have come up. Last February, James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence for the United States government, issued his annual report, a report unlike he had ever issued before. And I say that because there was a whole section on the issue of infectious diseases continues to threaten human security worldwide. And they highlighted this, that this had the ability to undermine whatever governments we had out there and could create literally a colossal global calamity. Jim Kim, the president of the World Bank, gave a very important talk in January of this year in which the headline says it all: the world is dangerously unprepared for future pandemics. I've spent my whole life trying to get ready for outbreaks or large global pandemics, and I can tell you we've never been less prepared. And I'll give you the reasons why tonight and what we have to do to turn that around, and why those students in this room, I'm counting on you to help us get out of this mess. And frankly, you don't have a choice because you don't have a get-out-of-jail card. We've got to figure out how to deal with this. Bill Gates, someone would say, knows a lot about a lot of things. I personally appreciate what he did at Microsoft, but I can tell you the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been the bedrock of public health support and preparedness for the last decade. But for Bill Gates, I don't know what we'd be doing right now for support for public health around the world. Amazing. He wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine this past March that, in fact, the thing that had the greatest likelihood of disrupting the entire world order as we knew it was an infectious disease pandemic, not pneumothoracic war. Think of that. A pandemic. And he went through all the reasons why. I think he's right. Now I'd like to share with you why some of this is the case. And what I'm going to do here, if I can be successful here, old men need their glasses. See if our guy up here is, I'm trying to get down here. Well, I may not be able to do this. What I needed to try to do here was get the pointer to take me down to the bottom there. Is our AV guy still here? Okay, he's not. Well, I'm going to have to try to get us back in here then. What? This isn't working. What? Thank you. Student, right? Okay. This will give you a sense. This was data from basically 2014. But these are air flights every day that are occurring around the world. This is actually one 24-hour period. Every one of those is an airplane full of people and an underbody that may be full of mosquitoes or any number of different things. Now watch what happens globally as you follow time. They just keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. Do you want to know if we're mixing up germs around the world? Either in people or animals or in cargo holds? It is now around the world. That's the modern world we live in today. Remember, 100 years ago, this didn't exist for all of time. So this gives you a sense, basically, of what we're talking about today just with airplane travel. I did it. Who said you can't teach an old dog new tricks? This is a slide taken from yesterday. Every hour on the hour, all the major shipping vessels in the world report their location and the weather conditions. We follow this every hour. And you can see 62,000 different ships up here, all big cargo ships. This is the warehouse of the world. Any of you who are business majors in here, do not ever suggest the word warehouse. That's enough to make you go to confession daily. Because it's a just-in-time delivery world. Things that we need right now are on a ship somewhere sailing from China to the United States that we hope they get here in time for tomorrow's need. All these ships are under a Liberian or Panamanian flagship. Nobody's really in charge. Anything that would disrupt this would be amazing. We just did a study several years ago in which we surveyed a group of PharmDs, doctorates in pharmacy. They spanned all the areas of medicine. We said, what are those life-saving drugs you have to have every day or people die? Not cancer drugs, not a lot of those lifestyle drugs. What do you need that's on the crash cart in the emergency room? We found 31 different drugs that we absolutely have to have every day or people die right now. Now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. Of those 31 drugs, all of them were generic. All of them were made offshore. All of them are just-in-time delivery, and there's no stockpiles anywhere. That's how vulnerable the world is right now. So that's what we have to deal with in terms of understanding the global context of infectious disease in the modern world. If you look at travelers, right now tourism is obviously a booming business. Over 1.1 billion people crossed the international border last year just for purposes of tourism. Next time you take that trip to the Caribbean, follow this talk later, and I want to ask you about your mosquito exposure and what that means to you, or what it might mean to you. I don't want to dismiss a number of important things like antibiotic resistance and the availability of antibiotics. Just think of this. Every time a child is born, we assume it takes them about 20 years to hit a next generation level. It takes an E. coli 20 minutes. And now we're watching rape as a weapon of war in Africa be used repeatedly and beginning to continue to alter the HIV-related transmission issues. These are not done. The issues of even what to do in terms of a disease like polio, we're trying to eradicate it from the world. We keep finding hotspots where the virus finds those hotspots before we do. In the Ukraine, right now we're very concerned about a major polio outbreak in the Ukraine because less than 25% of the population is vaccinated for polio, given all that's going on there, and we now just have cases introduced. Look at the issues of something like measles. A disease that we don't even really worry about in this country because we've done such a good job of vaccinating our kids. Yet in the Congo, we're talking about an outbreak that just in the last several weeks has killed 400 individuals. Remember, those people travel to somewhere, and maybe not to the United States, but they travel to somewhere where somebody who is going to travel to the United States comes. And I can guarantee you, if we don't keep our immunization rates up, we're going to find more and more of these illness problems like this. Then we even have the issue with the refugees and what's happening with worldwide migration. Right now, what's happening in the Middle East and Syria is a travesty of humankind. But one of the issues I mentioned before, the number of deaths from infectious diseases as opposed to even just those related to war. The risk of infection continues to increase, and we even see the fear that goes with that, which in some cases is totally unjustified. Yes, they're at risk for themselves, but not to others. And already our dear colleagues in Norway, who are well known for being some of the most altruistic and socially conscious people in the world, are seeing big increases in public fear about taking refugees in. What is that going to mean? Today we also worry about the issue of another disease called monkeypox. Monkeypox is a virus very similar to that which is called smallpox, but in this case transmitted from some human primates to humans, not from human to human. We never used to see monkeypox problems in Africa. Why? Because everybody was getting vaccinated or they'd had smallpox, and either one protected you against monkeypox. But we have been vaccinating for 30-some years in Africa. We've now created a whole cohort of people who have been born who have no immunity to either smallpox or monkeypox. Now, monkeypox isn't at all like its sister smallpox. Instead of killing 35% of the people who get it, it only kills 20%. Still pretty big. We're worried today we have no plan in place whatsoever for what to do about monkeypox. We never thought we'd have to be vaccinating again. We never thought about that. We thought we're done. Then that brings me to smallpox. I just want to mention this. This is an issue that has been front and center for me. Probably the most poignant moment in my public health career that I will still never forget, and it haunts me to this day. I had the good fortune of serving as a personal advisor to His Majesty King Hussein of Jordan for a number of years on the issues of bioterrorism before he died. In January of 1999, I was still at the State Health Department. I got a call from the Jordanian embassy saying His Majesty wanted to see me right away, which usually meant sometime in the next few weeks we'd set something up. No, right away. To make a long story short, I was on a plane to London, where he was at his estate Ascot outside of London, within 4 hours in the same clothes I went to work in. I landed at Heathrow early that next morning, overnight flight. I was picked up by the security detail, taken to the main house. Usually if I would come, I would stay at one of the outhouse areas, beautiful lodge areas, sleep for the day, etc. I went right into his house. I hadn't showered since I went to work. I'm still in the same clothes. He comes down in his robe, along with the head of GID, the Jordanian CIA, and pumped me for 4.5 hours about smallpox. I knew he knew something. Everyone knew King Hussein was at the centerpiece of every major intelligence information, good guys or bad guys. 3 weeks later, he wrote a very famous letter that dismissed his brother as the regent or heir apparent and appointed his son, Prince Abdallah, to be the new king, which unfortunately came true just 4 weeks later when he died suddenly. But what was more telling was most of the letter was about a man saying that the thing he worried most was not about war, he worried about terrorism because of what that would do to the ripple effect through the population. The thing he worried most about was smallpox. And he wrote it all in this letter. To this day, the intelligence communities don't know what he knew. But I had no doubt at that time that smallpox was not just securely in 2 labs at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and at the Russian research station at Novosibirsk, Siberia. I still don't believe it's true. But we don't even need to worry about that anymore, because here's a disease, even though it was only here in part of the 20th century and only part of the world, it killed 200 million people. But smallpox is something you can't ever forget. Day 3 in a young child, day 5, days 9, day 13, and knowing that up to 30% of these people will die. A large number will be left blind and other health problems. Not a good disease. There's a young girl from Pakistan who had hemorrhagic smallpox, which is very common in pregnant women and selected individuals where you can see the bleeding in her eyes and mouth. These people typically die within about 24 hours, almost 100% case fatality rate. Not a good disease. Well, why do I tell you this? Because you know what? Even if somebody doesn't have it out there, even if a terrorist is not going to use it, back in the 1980s, we had made a decision in this country, we maybe should destroy the smallpox viruses that we had left. But there was a big debate. Well, we should keep them because we may need to do research on them. No, we should destroy them. But everybody agreed we'd publish the sequences. So back then, before we could sequence agents like we can today, major projects were undertaken to sequence orthopox viruses, i.e. smallpox. Well, this is like sequencing the Grand Canyon. These are huge, huge viruses. And nobody ever thought second of it of publishing all the data. So you can go right now online and find the entire genetic sequence for several smallpox strains. Well, you know what? Technology changed. Just like back in 1980, I still got on a hardline phone, asked an operator to connect me to a certain long-distance number, and that was it. Today, my iPhone does FaceTime with me when I'm in Korea with my grandkids. Very different. Well, guess what happened? We now got good at taking these genetic sequences and making real bugs. In 2001, a research group at Stony Brook in New York reconstructed a polio virus de novo from just taking the published sequences, buying amino acids, now putting them together like Tinker Toys, and they made a virus that was lethal. Well, we never thought we could make smallpox virus because it was a 1,600-story genetic building. It was just too big. Nobody could make a 1,600-story genetic building. Just as this article says, we can today. I have no doubt it's going to be just a matter of time before somebody makes smallpox virus. I don't even think it's necessary for nefarious purposes. But if it gets out, we're screwed. That's part of the modern world we live in that I would never have imagined myself 15 or 20 years ago. Influenza remains also a lion king of infectious diseases. Again, for those, and Norm, this is your bird-centric world, where in fact, influenza viruses took up residence in wild aquatic birds many millions of years ago, many millions of years before chickens even showed up. They basically live in the gut of the bird. They don't have very good receptor sites for getting into lungs, whether bird lungs or even human lungs particularly. But guess what? Over time, those viruses do fly out of there, and they do get into poultry, and they can cause severe disease. They still have a hard time getting to people, but they can, because again, the receptor sites, the lock and key just doesn't work very well. But pigs become the universal recipient and donor. Pig lung cells actually have receptor sites for bird viruses and human flu viruses. And when the viruses get together in the same pig cell just by accident, they're the most promiscuous virus you could ever imagine. They swap out gene material left and right, and they create new strains that are now human adapted but have a lot of the bird characteristics. That's when we get pandemics. That's when suddenly influenza wipes through like it did in 1918, killing over 50 million people in this world. Well, we did worry in 2004 when H5N1, a type of influenza virus, showed up in birds in Asia, caused us some real concerns. Well, it kind of, you can see from the data on the left there, we had cases in humans, but we never saw sustained human-to-human transmission. And I don't think anybody even heard about this in the media. Look what's happened in Egypt over the last year. It's exploded, and we can't explain why. It could be more exposure, but as the virus changed, and what we're worried about is over time, this virus is it's like a drip phenomenon. Boom, 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 and pretty soon there's enough water in that barrel to put out a fire or to drown someone. And what we're worried about is we are seeing these changes now with H5N1 after having everybody get upset in 2004, and then by 2004 everybody said, oh, don't bother me with that again. Is Egypt a harbinger of things to come? Well, I don't know, but this is the one that even scares me more. H7N9, another type of flu virus out of birds that we had never even thought of as being a potential risk factor for humans. And it turned out that in 2013, suddenly we started seeing these cases. By the way, a third of the people who get this die. And it was not very good person-to-person transmission. It was coming out of somewhere, though. And it turned out that with high-path flu viruses like H5N1, they do kill domestic poultry. Where there's smoke, there's fire. You know you got a problem if your birds start dying. These birds were all fine. We went in and sampled these birds, and guess what? They were loaded with H7N9, and they weren't sick at all, not even a slight fever. We did the studies as part of our center at Minnesota, in which we actually took the viruses from China and put them into quail, chickens, turkeys, etc. And guess what we found? Instead of mostly pooping it out the south end, which is what birds do with flu viruses, they were blowing it out the north end, and they weren't getting sick. And initially, the Chinese went in and tried to basically take out these flocks, but there was such an uprising by the population of killing healthy birds that they stopped doing it. Right now, there's no control rods in the reaction in China. What's this going to do over time? I don't know. But the case fatality rate remains at 30-some%. Is this going to be the next flu virus? I don't know. It could be. It's primarily located in eastern China. Get a sense of this. The average time period from a chicken being hatched until that chicken breast is on your plate is about 35 days. 35 days. It's the fastest of anything we have in the food supply for converting energy to protein. In the peri-urban region of Shanghai alone, just one town, one city in China, 100 million chickens are born every month just to feed Shanghai for that month. Every one of those is a virus vessel. Every one of those is another test tube. That's just one city in China. The WHO put out a rather strong statement in February of this year, basically saying warning signals from the volatile world of influenza viruses. The current global influenza situation is characterized by a number of trends that must be closely monitored. These include an increase on and on and on. The summary statement here, the diversity and geographic distribution of influenza viruses currently circulated in wild and domestic birds are unprecedented since the advent of modern tools for virus detection and characterization. The world needs to be concerned. Well, we've been following this since 1940s. With virus detection, but even if you go back to chicken flock health studies dating back into the turn of the century, nobody's ever seen this before. Something is happening in nature, and I don't know what's going to keep these viruses from spilling out and causing a pandemic. Look no further than what happened right here. Don't go very far from here. This past summer, we in the U.S. were kind of smug about our quote-unquote poultry production capability and our biosecurity to keep viruses out. And I say this with kindness because it's not that anybody did anything wrong, it's we didn't know better, but it's kind of like the people that buy a submarine, put a screen door on it, and never take it under water for 10 years and tell everybody how well the screen door works, and the first time they take it under, it didn't work so well. Well, suddenly, with the high-path virus, we had 223 different outbreaks of H5N2 in poultry in Minnesota, Iowa, and to a couple of adjoining states in small numbers. Almost 50 million birds died or were put down. This is unprecedented. This is incredible. We'd never had that happen before. We had one small outbreak of a high-path flu virus in American poultry back in 1983 in 6 farms in Pennsylvania, all next to each other, and we put it down. We don't know if this is going to come back or not. It could. Again, we're in total uncharted territories. What was really interesting is we had this mindset. This is this closed mindset that we own today. This is where our liberal arts students challenge us on everything. We thought, well, this has to be kind of, if a farm gets infected, it has to be like a concentric circle exposure, like a bomb. So, you're this far out, this far out. Well, we now know that's not the case. We actually did virus sampling outside of these barns, and we looked at the spread. And guess what? It was a windrose, meaning it was a long plume. You could have been 1 mile on either side of that farm, but if you weren't in the wind plume, you were fine. But if you were 20 miles downwind, you might have got hit. totally rewriting the world of flu viruses. So suddenly, what do we do to create poultry production in this country? We concentrated them in places like Candy-Ojai County. Because the ease of production, delivering supplies, harvesting. Do you know where we put our pig operations? In the same counties. Talk about a mixing vessel, and remember, pigs don't get sick with this virus, so we don't really know what's happened with virus infection in pigs. Again, if I had told you this story last winter, any of you would have looked at me and said, you know, what's he been drinking? And now it's right before us. Back in the old days, you didn't have to worry about vectors, i.e. mosquitoes or anything else, surviving in airplane flights. You actually didn't always know you were going to survive. You know, DDT, between the DDT and the smoke, you could cover everything. That's times have changed. Today, Aedes albopictus, which is the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst mosquitoes. And I say that because their mosquitoes basically are a nuisance until they can carry a disease. And only a very limited number of mosquito species carry diseases. The ones that carry diseases are the ones that get infected themselves. So when that guy takes a blood meal there, woman actually, only female mosquitoes feed, that's a whole other story. Basically what's happening is they take blood up into their proboscis, they then take the virus from, or whatever else is in that blood, and if they are susceptible to that virus or that parasite, they then become infected, and it goes basically into their salivary glands. So the next time they take a blood meal, they don't die from the infection. When they inject that saliva down that proboscis to keep the blood flowing, an anticoagulant, that's how you get your mosquito bite. You're reacting to that material. But that's where the virus or the parasite is that causes you to get infected. Well, thank God most mosquitoes don't carry any diseases at all. Aedes albopictus is the universal donor. It can get infected by darn near everything. Look what happened. The green areas of the world where Aedes albopictus was historically found through the 1980s. And then we had a major run on used tires for large vehicles because of the world economics around tire and rubber production. And suddenly we started shipping tires from Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, that inside of them were all these Aedes albopictus eggs. And they landed in ports all around the world. And look what happened overnight. Aedes albopictus spread around the world, including right here in Minnesota. And it does fine, thank you. So we suddenly created, we put this huge howitzer right in the public square and just said, dared anybody, just put a bullet in, go ahead. So we already had the underpinnings of a potential for a problem before any viruses or bacteria or parasites showed up. Aedes aegypti, again, another famous mosquito. The reason why it took so long to finish the Panama Canal, because in fact it kept causing all the people to die from yellow fever. It worked there. This slide is one we're actually working on right now, but in the 1930s, this is where Aedes aegypti was found in the Americas. By the 1970s, when I got an infectious disease, and everybody said, why are you getting into horse and buggy making? You know, it's old, it's done, it's over with. They had every reason to say that. Not only was it only in lesser areas of the Americas, but in much lower numbers. This is 2000, and we're now in the process of making the 2015 slide, and I can tell you it has spread even much more through the Americas, and the numbers of populations have gone dramatically higher. 1930, 2015, you tell me which were we better prepared to deal with mosquitoes with? So again, this isn't just trying to tell you that things are worse because I want you to be worse. We have the data to show we are living in a very different world order today. This slide, which was meant not to be read because it's meant to scramble your brain to think about something, and that is chikungunya. And you say, what the heck is that? It's a mosquito-borne virus that basically, like another disease called dengue fever, causes people to really get kind of sick. But not that many people die. Fortunately, probably 1, 2 to 3% at most. But we're now realizing that 40 to 50% of people that get chikungunya actually end up having some very serious neurologic and muscular skeletal issues for months and months and months. Up to 40% or more. Well, guess what? In December of 2013, somebody brought chikungunya-infected mosquitoes to St. Martin in the Caribbean. Since then, all these millions of cases have occurred. We now know it's millions and millions. And this is what's happened. It has spread not only through the entire Caribbean, It's into all the Americas, and even in the United States, we now have indigenous transmission in Florida, including pretty widespread transmission in Dade County and the Keys. 38 states have reported people with chikungunya, most of them traveling to the Caribbean for vacation. So when you think about your vacation spot this winter, I always thought the cold of St. Cloud and St. John's was not so bad. Remember, this hadn't existed in the end of 2013 or early in 2014, and look where it's at today. Millions of cases have occurred. Other news scans, you can see here, this is from our CIDRAP website where we have a very active news site. PAHO today just announced 12,000 new chikungunya cases. And in studies being done, looking at actual cases versus reported, we think the underreporting is about somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 80-fold of the actual cases. So when we report 1 million cases, you can assume that that's 50 to 80 million at least cases. That's pretty significant. This is a paper that I published in Lancet, a major medical journal, a few years ago, 2011. It's the worst paper I've ever published in my life for heartache. We had been very involved with the 2009 influenza pandemic at our group, and we took on to a study to look at just how well the flu vaccines work after that. And we thought it would take us a couple of months, and how prepared would we be for the future? Well, the more we peeled back the onion, and the more we found wasn't the case. In this paper, we found that we had been grossly overselling how well flu vaccines work in the public, and that at best, 59% was the average, particularly for younger people, and that we had a real absence of data for older people. And yet we've been pushing this. Last year, this was really brought home, where in fact, originally it was 23%. In the end, in the bottom slide you can see here, overall flu vaccine was just 19% effective, no evidence of protection of those over 65. And yet, I bet most of you didn't know that. Now, we hope we're going to do better this year because we've actually put 2 strain changes in, but it's still not going to be optimal. Well, what's going on here? We need flu vaccines seasonally, but more importantly, we need them for pandemics. We looked at the issue of the pandemic in 2009 that we had, which was a quite mild one by all standards. And if you look here, what you see, that blue line actually is the number of % of visits for influenza-like illness on this right bar, basically really detailing the second wave of the 2009 pandemic, which really peaked in mid to late October. Vaccine didn't arrive until October, but most of it didn't get here until November, December. And if you look at the numbers, we're still talking about 60 and 80 million doses. But most of these doses went in kids, which was a 2-dose regimen, so there you have to cut it in half of people that really got vaccinated. The whole world experienced this. Most of the world had no vaccine at all. Even the new modern cell culture vaccines using the old technology of the 1940s, which is what the current flu vaccine is, didn't get out any sooner than the egg-based cultures. We got problems. We went back and looked at 68 and 57, the 2 previous pandemics. Each time the vaccine arrived too little, too late. Well, we then did this quite exhaustive study starting in 2009 called the CIDRAP Comprehensive Influenza Vaccine Initiative Study, the compelling need for game-changing influenza vaccines. And you may not be able to see all this, but each of these chapters reflects a very different part of the flu vaccine world. We went through over 15,000 papers. We even had the old Department of War studies brought out of the archives to look at the original flu vaccine licensure studies of the 1940s and to understand what they did. We interviewed over 120 world experts in all aspects of vaccine, some of them many times. Finance, business. If you look at chapters down here at 10, 11, 12, we looked at the entire business model. And guess what? We've been telling people for so long this vaccine is so good, the vaccine industry said, well, why are we going to invest any money in a new vaccine? You've been telling me it's really good. We were shooting ourselves in the foot. Paper after paper has come out recently showing new potential vaccines that are very different than the ones we have today. Very different, but could work very differently and much more protective. Idea of a universal flu vaccine, which I'm not sure can ever be universal, but we can sure get one that could work a lot longer, a lot better. What's the problem? This is a figure from our report. This thing called the Valley of Death. What happens when you start working in discovery in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, we invest all this money in this. When I say all, it's 20 million, 50 million here, but but not big money relative to what vaccines are going to take. And then we suddenly get it, and it stalls out when it gets to phase 3, which is actually putting it into people and doing a big study. We estimate today it'll probably cost us $1 billion to bring one flu vaccine through. And nobody in the private sector has an appetite for that. They'd have to charge $120 a dose for flu vaccine to even think about recouping any of their investment. How's that going to compete against the ones we have now? Because public health has not been clear and compelling in its message. We need new and better flu vaccines, and they should be government supported. In other words, we're not going to get them. So we can sit here and argue about this, but one day we're going to wake up with a flu pandemic on our hands and saying, why in the hell didn't we do better? Even recently, BARDA, the organization in the U.S. government that's supposed to be funding these kinds of things, basically said we can't fund what's out there right now, and they blamed it basically on the inadequacy of the vaccines candidates, which really was the truth of the matter was you can't go in and buy a new Lexus for 10 cents. And they just didn't have the resources to do what it's going to take. So meanwhile, you and I are all sitting here. My kids, my grandkids are sitting potentially on top of a future flu pandemic with a vaccine that's grossly inadequate and a vaccine that'll be way too little too late. And we know it now. We don't have to wait for the hurricane to hit shore to know it's going to happen. It's all about public policy and leadership. We waste $1 billion every day in our government. Wouldn't it be great if we had something that actually protected us and worked? Ebola, let me just briefly say, this is another example of the same thing. I mean, all of you are probably Ebola'd out by now, but the bottom line is this outbreak started in Africa, in the western countries of Africa, a little over 2 years ago, and basically rewrote the history of Ebola. We've had more cases, 20-some thousand cases, 11,000 deaths, more than all the cases combined in the previous 40 years, 2,400 cases, about 600 deaths. Well, what happened? This is a piece that I wrote in the Washington Post a year ago last July. Not last July, but the month before anybody even cared about Ebola in this country, when the first American physicians came home with Ebola from Africa. And it was my attempt to get the world to wake up and said, in this article I said, you know what? Wake up, guys. This has the risk to destabilize the entire Western African area. And people yawned. But the one thing I made clear was there was no evidence this virus had changed. Africa had changed. Africa was no longer a continent of rural villages. Kinshasa, Congo today, a country and a city with 11 million people living in one concentrated area, 4 million living in the worst slums you could imagine. Nairobi, Kenya, I've been in Kibera, the slum of Nairobi, where it took me days to get the odor out of my nose. 1 million people living in the most squalid conditions. This is going to happen again. If this virus gets into those settings from rural Africa, there's nothing that's going to stop it again. We're going to have a deja vu all over again. And we've had great success in West Africa at a great cost, but it's not over. We are cautiously optimistic. We've done a successful job of getting the cases to stay low. We keep, 1 week we report Ebola free. Sierra Leone has some cases. The next week, this recent article from this week here, now we have some cases in Guinea. Brand new surprises. We had no idea that when you recover from Ebola virus infection, you may have the virus in your seminal fluid for 6 months or more. So if you go back home and start having sex again, you're going to have more Ebola cases. We never knew that. We didn't know that it's in your eyeballs. It's in your ocular fluid. If you have anybody look at your eyes because of serious eye problems, which we see a lot of with Ebola, doctors and nurses are at risk by touching your eyes, even though you've been recovered for months. So we're rewriting the book, but there's optimism. But what did we really learn? Well, we learned at one time, basically, we could respond, but it took us months and months to do. What we now know is that we really haven't learned the lessons because nothing is in place after Ebola. WHO hasn't changed. There's nothing in the works right now to really change WHO at all. We did find a vaccine was effective using this unique ring vaccination approach where we vaccinated around cases and looked at whether or not people got infected or not. This is a vaccine that needs to be kept at minus 60 degrees. In Africa, that's not easy to do. It's a vaccine that we don't really understand how reactionary it is in terms of people who have HIV infection. We need more vaccines. Our group at CIDRAP, the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, along with the Wellcome Trust, the largest foundation in the world supporting infectious diseases, slightly larger than the Gates. Jeremy Fair, the director, and I chair this group of 28 international experts that have been staying on top of this vaccine, because guess what? It's the yawn factor again. Once it went away, everybody's walking away. At least 3 companies have put over $250 million into research for Ebola vaccines. They're all going to lose it. The same thing happened with SARS in 2004. Are they ever going to come back to the table again? Not likely. We've shot ourselves in the foot, and we may not in the end get even a licensed Ebola vaccine out of this situation. We hope we'll get at least one, but we don't know what's going to happen. We've got to change that. Again, thinking for the future. I don't want to see Kinshasa go up in Ebola flames one day. A vaccine would sure help. Which gets me to my last topic here, just talking about the issue of another immediate and urgent health crisis. SARS came upon us back in 2003-04. It was a severe acute respiratory distress syndrome disease. It started in the Guangdong province of China. We realized this virus called the coronavirus was actually in badger dogs and civet cats in the market, both rodents, not dogs and cats actually. They were a food supply. Once we recognized they were the source, they were exterminated from the food source, food chain. All the human cases, new ones, from that source stopped. We basically shut the faucet off. But we had to just mop up then the human-to-human transmission. This is what happened. What took this around the world was a physician in the red box up there from the Guangdong province, stayed in room 911 at the Metropole Hotel in Hong Kong. All those people in that yellow box stayed at the Metropole too. None of them had face-to-face contact with him. It was either in the elevator or living on the same floor. And then it spread around the world. 9,000 cases, thousands of deaths, literally shut down Toronto General Hospital. It was a disaster. One of the things we learned is some people don't spread the virus at all, but a couple of people become super spreaders where they shed it very effectively. Well, then along comes this situation. A pathologist in Saudi Arabia 2 years ago recognized a very serious illness, looked like SARS, did the testing on it, turned out to be a new coronavirus we now call MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus. Same kind of family of viruses, coronavirus. Well, since that time, we have seen this epidemic activity going on in Saudi Arabia. Initially, it seasoned around the early spring when camels were birthing their camels, young camels there. But more recently, it's been constant, and the red boxes actually reflect an outbreak in South Korea. It's all about the camels. We now realize that dromedary camels in the Middle East are the likely source, and that, in fact, what we see happening here is these animals were previously infected with coronaviruses, but not what was called MERS. Something happened about 3 years ago. Genetically, this virus changed and suddenly started transmitting to people, causing severe illness. If you look at the whole schematic of how it happens, we believe bats are the ultimate source of this, but it got into the camels, then got into the people, and either spread in the community or more likely it spread in the hospital setting, where a super spreader might come in and actually be located. Well, dromedary camels are kind of important. Liberal arts educated people should know that. There are approximately 12 million dromedary camels in the world. Of those, only 1.5 billion live on the Arabian Peninsula. 10.5 million live in East Africa and North Africa. The country with the largest population of dromedary camels in the world is Somalia. Well, it turns out so far that virus hasn't crossed the Red Sea, but it's just a matter of time. And what this has been doing to the Arabian Peninsula, particularly KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, will be dwarfed by whatever might happen in Africa, because there's no resources to respond in Africa. This is just a function of time. But more specifically, we've had these continued outbreaks in hospitals in KSA. 3 outbreaks going on right now, a large one in Riyadh. The Saudis have responded very poorly. They have not followed the direction that public health officials, either from the WHO or elsewhere, have given them. I have been in the Middle East. I've worked up outbreaks in Abu Dhabi and United Arab Emirates. They're doing more about it, but it's very frustrating. So this source continues. And one of the issues about this is the camels. It turns out that camels in the Middle East are more sacred than service dogs could ever be in our country. Why? Because for 4,000 years, that's how they survived, with their camels. Camel milk in the desert. The camel meat that they did sacrifice from some camels. The beast of burden, even the shade protection in the desert. So if you go and tell one of them their camel's killing people, you might as well say something about my sister. Because that's how it's interpreted. And we're having major social cultural challenges there. If you look at this issue, we keep having these outbreaks in hospitals. The virus is coming from the camels. It's not stopping, gets in people, and then these super spreaders come along. We have new clusters of cases. As the Hajj just was completed yesterday, we're on bated breath with an incubation period of 7 to 10 days to see if any of these people take it back to the countries they came from. Over 2 million people arrived in Saudi Arabia from around the world. If you look here, again, more problems with the Hajj. We don't know what's going to happen here, but we're very concerned. Recently, the data shows that this virus may be changing and becoming even more amenable to human transmission. We think that's surely what happened in part in South Korea. What happened, though, is a reflection of this. People who become infected in the Arabian Peninsula and then fly elsewhere, either knowing they're infected and seeking medical care elsewhere, or not knowing, like 2 physicians who were treating patients in Saudi Arabia when they came back to the U.S., had no idea they were infected, and in both instances, neither hospital did any kind of major infection control for the first 24 hours. The only thing was, thank God, they were not super spreaders. To give you an idea what a super spreader can do, one of the outbreaks I worked up at a hospital in Abu Dhabi was one where, in fact, 7 different patients came into that hospital over a period of a year with MERS, didn't transmit to anybody. They felt very comfortable with what they were doing. The 8th patient came in, transmitted to 28 healthcare workers, 2 of them died. Again, the super spreader versus the non-super spreader. Well, to give you an idea why it's important, this was a paper published in the MMWR, the CDC weekly publication, after the 2 cases in the U.S., detailing the fact that every month about 70,000 people fly directly from the Arabian Peninsula to North America, either Canada or the United States, and others take indirect flights through Amsterdam or London. Every month, these people are dropping in on us. Every month, there's a risk there. But I worry even more today. 75% of all the health care in Saudi Arabia is provided by Indian or Filipino healthcare workers. And every day there's a 747 that leaves Riyadh to Manila or Mumbai. One day they're going to take back one of these infected healthcare workers and it's going to end there up there. So what happens when this occurs? This is an outbreak that I've been very involved with in South Korea at Samsung Medical Center, one of the most modern 2,300-bed hospitals in the world. Not some developing world hospital. It would rival whatever we see at the Mayo Clinic. Somebody came in with MERS, ended up having an outbreak where they found infection control lapses. This person had been in the Middle East. No one recognized him as having MERS. But the infection control lapses they saw were no different we'd see in every hospital around the country. To give you an idea what happened here, patient 1 came into Korea from the Arabian Peninsula, infected patient 14, who infected 80 people in the emergency room of the Samsung Medical Center, and it spread from there. They shut down this modern 2,300-bed hospital for 7 weeks. This just easily could be St. Mary's, the University of Minnesota Hospitals, or Mount Sinai, UCLA Medical Center. It could be any of them. We're not ready at all. Here, the president replaced the health minister, just to give you an idea of the impact that this has in a country. South Korean hospital is in the center of this. I've actually been, that's where I was last week, was at Samsung Medical Center again. And again, I can tell you over and over again, my worst nightmare is this just easily could happen in St. Cloud or Minneapolis or Rochester. It's just a matter of bad luck of getting the wrong patient to fly in and present with a respiratory illness. And we're not ready. What do we need? We need a vaccine for camels. We've been working hard to get that. Guess what? Nobody wants to fund it. Penny wise and pound foolish. Could this happen anywhere? Absolutely it could. That's the modern world of infectious diseases. Mark my word, it's going to. So let me just conclude by saying, one of our very famous American authors, Lewis Carroll, said it so well once, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. I feel desperately that's where we're at today. I challenge the students in this room to challenge us who are in positions of supposed authority and responsibility. What in the hell are we actually doing? How are we going to make this world so that when you grow up in 2050, you're not dying more frequently from antibiotic infections than you are from cancer? And right now, we have no roadmap. My most famous philosopher of all time, however, Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge once said, "Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?" And I can tell you, I need no convincing of why I do my job today. I think I'd do it if I didn't get paid. It's not about any more honors or publications. It's because of that lady sitting right here in this room and my 3 grandchildren and my other son. That's why I do it. And for all of you, and all of us in this room who are older ought to be asking ourselves the same question: what legacy are we leaving our kids? I can't think of a worse one right now than the infectious disease legacy. And if Norm Ford taught us anything, he taught us about the issue of being educated and acting on that education. And that's why I'm so honored to be here in front of you tonight, Norm, trying to do my best. Thank you very much. I think they like you, Norm.
At this point, we'll take a few questions. If there are any, if you can't speak as loud as I am, I do have a microphone that I can pass around.
And I'm the other mic. Yes.
Question, I've read recently not in detail about some viruses that they're finding in the Arctic that because of the melting of permafrost, et cetera, and there's one article I did read suggested that there was nothing necessarily for us to worry about. Is there anything
Yes.
for us to worry about? These viruses that have been dormant for
Well, let's put it this, thank you. For all of you didn't hear it about the viruses that are coming out of the permafrost. Well, first of all, what they're coming out of is bodies that were basically long-term secured bodies in the permafrost. And yes, we are concerned about that. We can't say that it's a big issue. Surely smallpox, other viruses could be there that could still be alive, flu viruses. We have had some experience with basically looking at bodies out of permafrost for flu viruses, and we could never find whole viruses, but it's a problem. But what you probably didn't hear this week in terms of infectious diseases is one that has me just, along with a number of my colleagues, chilled, and that is Mars. We have no idea. We now have confirmed that there's water on Mars, and we have no clue what a extraterrestrial microbe might look like or what it might do in a different world order. And originally, one of my mentors, Josh Lederberg, Nobel Prize laureate, got involved with the whole issue of biosecurity infectious diseases because of the original space flights. I can't tell you that it's going to be a problem. I would not want to find that there's a microbe on Mars we bring back that under the conditions of the Earth's atmosphere and the kinds of conditions here could spread and be a real problem. And so one of the things I know NASA, and there's a group of us that have been communicating about this, is very concerned if we do take any missions to Mars, now that we know that there's likely water there, which likely means there are microbes there, that in fact, what does that mean? So again, another twist in the modern world of infectious diseases. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation tonight. You talked about the infectious diseases, that a lot of it travel acquired when it comes to the U.S. And you said that one problem was the spillovers in the less developed countries. So what are some steps that we are taking in the U.S. in terms of like getting that fixed? In terms of, I know you talked about the immigration policies and how we're controlling that. So what are some recent promising steps that we're taking to
Well, let me just say right at the outset, you're one of the solutions. I can tell that. Because you're asking the right question. And we need a global plan. One of the things we've been working on is trying to get a global plan that says this is as important as buying bullets and guns. Because if you stop these problems, look at all the things else you stop. The best estimate right now in Ebola in West Africa puts it somewhere in the neighborhood of probably $100 billion in cost. Do you know how many healthcare systems we could have funded in West Africa for dimes on the dollar with that would have helped us stop this much earlier? At the same time, by the way, saved people from measles, saved them from TB, saved them from a number of other infections. So one of the things we have to get our head around is what is the cost of investment and what's the cost of not investing? So your question is right on the mark. You know, we shouldn't be just talking about sealing our borders from infectious diseases. Go to the disease and put it out where it's at. Figure out what we need to do with these kinds of issues. What are we going to do about mosquitoes? Don't tell me we can't do anything. I won't accept that. So I think there's a number of us that are trying to move, and we're trying to move the philanthropic community, where the largest transfer of wealth is going to occur in the next few years, to understand why this is a good investment in their world, why it's a good investment in governments, and not get bogged down into the politics of foreign aid, but get bogged down in how are we going to do all of this issue to save all of us, not just somebody in a foreign country. So thank you for that question. Very good. Yes?
What impact might climate change have on this whole problem?
I think by far the biggest impact climate change is going to have is it's going to change the vector borne disease picture a lot, because temperatures are going to warm up. We're going to see mosquitoes and other ticks surviving in areas they haven't survived before. In addition to that, though, part of that's not just surviving, but there's basically a situation where every winter mosquitoes go into a condition called diapause. Diapause is a sunlight length related change where right around Labor Day to middle September, mosquitoes in Minnesota stop taking blood meals. Why? Because genetically they've been programmed, if they take them later than that, they may have an early frost like we just had up in northern Minnesota, and they're dead meat because that blood will swell up, freeze, and they'll explode and die. That's why it could be 55 degrees in January and mosquitoes could actually be out, but they won't take a blood meal. Well, we've already seen in Alaska data to support that diapause has been extended almost 2 weeks in some areas now, where genetically those that would have in the past died are actually making it. And so with mosquitoes, in a summertime basis, we look at a concept called amplification. So if you have 2 mosquitoes basically infected, then it gets to 4, then it gets to 8, then it gets to 16, then it gets to 32, then it basically 64. And by the late summer is when you get most transmission of these diseases because you have so many infected. If we add on 1 or more 2 cycles at the end of the season, we could be in big trouble. We know that right here with encephalitis in Minnesota. So I think that that's going to be the highest impact issue. The second thing is going to be water and sanitation. Water is going to change completely. You know, I was recently in Hyderabad, India, where I stood from where I had stood 15 years before in a well. At that time, the water was basically coming from about 110 feet down. They were now at 700 feet down. They ran out of water. Climate change is going to fundamentally change the distribution of precipitation, and it's going to open up all these errors we've made in how we've allocated water. We've mined groundwater as if it somehow was limitless. We now realize that there will be big changes where, in fact, rainfall falls, and then how fast it does fall. We're going to see more flooding. So all of those with sanitation are going to be huge, and they're also going to affect the food supply. Right now, I worry desperately where we have really good growing conditions for produce in California. They can't do it anymore. They're running out of capability to do it. We're going to ship those offshore to countries where the hygienic and sanitation conditions are much less satisfactory, but that's going to be the same produce you're going to be eating. I can tell you, we've seen more and more produce outbreaks. So I think there's a number of things, but I clearly think that the vector control issues are going to be the huge ones. Make no mistake, climate change is real. It's real. And every day we postpone doing something, we're doing it not at our expense, you and me. We're going to be gone. But our kids and grandkids are going to suffer miserably. And if we don't care about anything else, just keep thinking about your kids and grandkids. You know, ask yourself, what does it mean to their world?
One more question?
Yes.
Part of me wanted to ask, how do you sleep at night? But I'll rephrase it.
know, I get that question a lot. And actually, I do pretty well. But you know, I think I actually have a belief that we can make a difference. I wouldn't be doing this. I mean, we wouldn't be fighting on the Ebola vaccine front right now. We wouldn't be doing a lot of these things. So it's just a matter of organizing society to understand this. And I hate to learn from lessons like Ebola or MERS to help advance it, but that's what we have to do. And so, you know, I have a fundamental belief in the future. Maybe I'm naive, but I have to, because I have 3 grandkids that I can't accept the fact that the world's going to be such a not much better place. So that's how. So I do sleep at night. I'm careful what I eat. You know, I do things like that, you know, but beyond that, we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. We have to do this. Thank you all very much, and Norm, again, thank you. It's my honor. Thank you.